Traditionally, the second Sunday in Advent, we hear John the Baptist crying out in the wilderness, "Prepare the way of the Lord." That's right. As we hear John preparing the people for the arrival of Jesus on earth, we are called to prepare room for Jesus' call on our own lives. This is a moment where John is certain and fearless in the face of what could be. He is filled with possibility and hope. He is declaring with his loudest voice that God is here. Instead, today we are offered a glimpse of the very end of John's ministry. John has been imprisoned by King Herod Antipas, a different Herod from last week. Herod's 3 sons carry on his legacy of harm and violence. And as John the Baptist faces his final days, we hear how his fear and suffering cause him to ask, "Are you the one who is to come? Or are we to wait for another?" It's an honest question from someone who can no longer see what God is up to. The certainty, the joy, the absolute proclamation has dwindled to a question. His circumstances have closed in around him. His fear is justified. His hope is flickering. And in this, we may hear a question that we are asking, is God really at work in this world? Jesus, instead of answering with explanations or arguments, in classic Jesus fashion, answers with another question. A question that helps guide us in how to look for God in fearful times. Jesus says, "Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight. The lame walk. Those with the skin condition are cleansed. The deaf hear. The dead are raised. And the poor have good news brought to them." Jesus is reminding John of what John already knows to be true, which is that we are to look for God's presence in the miraculous moments that happen around the edges. As the ones who will give this message to John depart, Jesus turns and directs to the crowd, and by extension all of us, another question: what did you go out into the wilderness to see? John's question reveals our expectations, what we hope God's work will look like. Jesus' question reveals our attention, where we expect to see God's work in action. Together, these teach us that peace depends on learning to see God at work in the world as it actually is, not just in the world that we wish would be. How we wish, how we wish. First, let's talk about John's question. Are you the one? Part of John is looking around and wondering if he got it wrong. He recognized Jesus in the Jordan. He announced him to the crowds, but now he's in a very different place. It's one thing to proclaim God's kingdom with water lapping at your feet and wind blowing through your hair. It's another to proclaim it from a prison cell. Fear does things to our vision, and so does disappointment, and so does waiting. John expected a Messiah who would come with fire and judgment, with an unmistakable upheaval of the powers that be. And who could blame him? In his commentary on this text, Stanley Saunders writes about how, quote, John's own ministry, which carried a healthy dose of judgment, seems to have roots especially in Malachi 3, 1 through 5, which says that the one who prepares the way for the day of the Lord's coming refines and purifies the people with soap and fire. Jesus, on the other hand, focuses on healing people and feeding people. The emphasis was light on judgment and heavy on healing. Who could blame John for wanting righteous judgment to rain down on the prison cells that kept him captive? Who could blame him for wanting to witness the toppling of governments that created such harm? So when Jesus doesn't unleash vengeance, when the world looks as oppressive as ever, John starts to wonder, did I get this wrong? Is this really how God works? Jesus responds by describing glimmers of good news that are already here. Because Jesus' ministry is still in the tradition of the Hebrew prophets, but sounds a lot more like Isaiah. Tell John what you hear and see, he says. In other words, God's power is here, but it looks different than you expected. It is quieter. It is gentler. More like restoration than overthrow, more like healing than spectacle. Peace begins in learning to trust the signs God is actually giving us, not the signs we wish God would give. And this is exactly the invitation Isaiah gives. I am about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? In this season, I've been thinking a lot about how hard it is to declare peace. In part because ceasefires and peace accords seem to have so little to do with whether the daily lives of people are filled with more food and water and less fear, more rebuilding and fewer bombs, more opportunities to learn and grow and flourish, fewer prisons. When people announce that peace has arrived, it's done, it's complete, it's important to ask, peace for who? And what does that look like? It's similar and sometimes even more disruptive when we are seeking peace in our own relationships, in our home, in our own bodies. It seems as though finding peace in a difficult relationship so often means peace for now until the next time. A sense of peace from a clean kitchen lasts but a moment. Finding peace and ease and joy in our minds and bodies isn't ever a goal complete, but a constant process. Sometimes I wish we could schedule peace. My family knows how I love a schedule. Force peace, capture peace. Instead, we are invited to practice peace, to nurture peace, to perceive peace. To first be radically present to the world as it is and ourselves as we are too. It seems much harder. As Thich Nhat Hanh wrote in Living Buddha, Living Christ, we often think of peace as the absence of war, that if powerful countries would reduce their weapon arsenals, we could have peace. But if we look deeply into the weapons, we see our own minds, our own prejudices, fear, and ignorance. Even if we transport all the bombs to the moon, the roots of war and the roots of bombs are still there in our hearts and minds, and sooner or later we will make new bombs. To work for peace is to uproot war from ourselves and from the hearts of all people. This isn't to say we shouldn't push for policies that reduce harm. Yes, absolutely. But if we're waiting for peace like that last complete piece of the puzzle, when that last piece, just bumps down and it makes that really satisfying sound. In my sermon prep, was trying to see if I could capture that sound, but you know that sound, right? Where it just, it's so satisfying. If we wait for peace like that, it will be a long time. Peace cannot be shellacked in place. Did anyone ever do that with a puzzle? You finish the puzzle and then you glue it all down and you frame it and you put it up on a wall? Yeah, a few people did. A few people did. When I was young, my family and I would work on puzzles, and my little brother went through a very little brother phase where he thought hiding the pieces was a super fun game. It added an element of hide and seek that I was not looking for in my puzzle making experience. Searching for a piece for 20 minutes only to see him with a little smile in the corner and realize that I was never going to find it on the table where I had been looking for it. Annoying as it was probably a better metaphor for what it means to search for peace in this world, hiding always around the edges. It's also probably why my family felt compelled to glue it all down when we got all the pieces in one place. God doesn't say, I'm about to do a big thing, or an obvious thing or a dramatic thing that solves everything today, you're welcome. God says new. God says it is springing up like a shoot from dry ground, like receiving each day our daily bread, like a baby born under the shadow of empire. This is where Advent peace is born, in the gentle, steady work of God that is happening, whether or not the headlines confirm it. If Jesus were to answer our version of John's question, are you the one or should we look for another? He might begin the same way, by asking us, what have we seen and heard? Because the signs of God's presence are still here. They may not be loud. They may not match the vision of rescue we hope for, but they are real and they are happening in the very places we're tempted to overlook. Where do the blind see today? Maybe in the person who finally recognizes their own worth after years of believing they had none. Or maybe in someone using a loved one's correct pronouns or name, or at the community meal when someone has time to sit and talk with a neighbor who they might have walked by 100 times at the library. Where do the lame walk? Maybe in the collective steps of a congregation moving towards justice even when it feels small and insignificant. Maybe in the one who gathers up the courage to take a small step towards sobriety or forgiveness. Maybe in someone going to therapy for the very first time. Where are the poor hearing good news? In every doorbell rung with a fresh box of food from the food and clothing bank. In every Know Your Rights card that is passed out with the promise of solidarity. And every protest sign held up on a corner. Where is new life emerging? In relationships healed. In small acts to make the world whole. In the community members showing up for one another in quiet and faithful ways. Church, these may not be the signs that we want to write into our own scripts. They are not always the sweeping, world-fixing gestures we cry out for, and nor should we stop hoping for, dreaming of, praying for the world of justice and harmony complete. And as we wait in the soon and not yet of God's kingdom, Jesus reminds us to look for the signs of peace that are alive in this world. The signs that Marilyn and Wally offered us this morning. The signs that reveal God at work in the world as it is. The glimmers in the dark night, the puzzle pieces hidden behind the bookshelf. Beloveds, in this season of Advent, as we look around and sometimes wonder, is God doing something? Our question is met with another. Our God is doing a new thing. Do we not perceive it? Let us perceive it. Amen.